Yeah, that's great. All right. So, hi, welcome to PTSD on the battlefield and beyond. I hope everyone had an opportunity to read on Facebook the sort of a disclaimer, but also some guidelines on PTSD. Basically, I would ask that since PTSD can be a very sensitive subject for very many people, that if you are using a trigger or are asking about a trigger word, please follow the guidelines below on the letters itself. We're not going to be getting into any policies, laws, etc. regarding those issues. We are going to be looking at them, though, in terms of asking questions. I would like this to be a safe space so that people can ask questions about PTSD and receive answers about PTSD. I do not have all of the answers. I'm going to tell you right now, I do not have all of the answers. I've done a lot of work and I've networked with a couple of health officials in my area in Fairbanks. But other people may have some idea. So if you are unfamiliar with those triggers, if you'll take a second, if they are listed on the Facebook page, and then there should have been some handouts. And let me see if I can get those. I'll try to upload those during our discussion. Let's see here. Oops. I am Kemper, and I have been diagnosed with CPTSD. I've actually had PTSD for many years, long time. However, I finally got a diagnosis about a year and a half ago, and I have been slowly surviving that treatment, which is survival in itself. And then I also have some information on PTSD and some suggestions from some health officials. So if you are willing to talk about yourself, feel free to. You do not have to, though. This is a safe space. I would ask also that since this is a safe place, that if you need to clue out because of something, feel free to. I have a sign that says topic over. I'm going to take off the screen share behind me. That if for some reason it is a trigger that bothers you, just sign out. It's all good. So does anybody have any questions before we get started regarding the guidelines?
I just have a question to make sure. Does anybody need subtitles for this class? Because we have a workaround for Zoom for breakout rooms, but if anybody does need subtitles, I can arrange that. Otherwise, we'll just keep going.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. So we have our triggers. Has everybody been able to read those and have access to those? No. Okay. I will try to upload those as we go into the chat room. But I'm not really too sure how to get there. Okay, so PTSD in terms of a roundtable, we have, in terms of trigger words, are rape and sexual assault, abuse, CA, which deals with child abuse, AC, animal cruelty, self-injurious behavior, SH, suicide, violence, guns, CP, CM, kidnapping, some death, dying, pregnancy, childbirth, abortion, miscarriage. So these are just some of them that can affect us in terms of triggers. So if you would if you're in doubt, put it out there. So PTSD in a fighting community can be very, very rough. I am not a fighter, but I have done a lot of water bearing. And I remember distinctly sitting in the middle of an ongoing battle with Sir desperately needs my help, who was pinned against a wall during a battle and had just he had triggered and he just was not there, and he was having a difficult time. A trigger is basically something that takes the survivor and puts them back into that moment right there. Now, there are different kinds of PTSD. There's reactive PTSD, there's complex TSD, there's comorbid, which is a combination of a whole bunch of things. And we kind of use the term loosely. However, PTSD usually starts from a single incident or a traumatic incident, or like war is a good example of that. CPTSD usually begins way in childhood and builds up. And then comorbid is a combination. And then there is also, just one moment, please. There is acute stress disorder, which isn't exactly the same, but is sort of a preliminary. There's uncomplicated, which is just linked to one traumatic event. So for example, I got attacked by a bear once. So that would be the uncomplicated PTSD, and comorbid. So the DSM does recognize that there is PTSD. The various forms, though, usually fall underneath that and are not always in the DSM, but they are listed in the ICDs of the physician's handbook. Is everybody familiar with triggers, or does everybody have an understanding of triggers? Would anybody be willing to provide a definition as they see fit on what a trigger is? Okay, so when you are faced with the trigger, your mind basically goes back to the event. During and then that event becomes what is in the present at that moment in time. So there's an interesting thing that happens to the body during a trigger. What basically happens is, if you can picture the scariest example that you can muster. I was talking to my partner and husband about this, and I said, list the scariest thing about it. He said there was a giant spider in the living room and it moved and scared him, and his heart went racing. So during trauma, basically your body says, you know, there are things that I don't need here. I really need to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. And instead it focuses on your heart, what it needs, circulatory system, what it needs. That's about it, and lungs. And so all of your other symptoms, your bodily functions, yes.
A quick clarification, is a trigger response similar to a fight and flight response?
That's a great question. And yes, it is. Sometimes a fight and flight response happens during the event. And then sometimes in a trigger, it can put you back there and put you into a flight, fight, or even freeze response, in which you can't move forward. So that means if you have, like, for my diagnosis, that meant that in my childhood, because of the abuse, is that my body was constantly in this state of survival. I am constantly running away from a saber-toothed tiger. So what happens is that the body at some point starts to break down, which is why 80% of all PTS survivors, and I'm going to use the term survivors rather than sufferers, actually have health problems. Also, they have a lot of emotional problems because of that. Did I answer your question? Okay. There are some differences in men and women. Men tend to be irritable, impulsive. They tend to be more violent. Now, these are generalizations. This can happen for anybody. Okay, so these are just some of the ways that one of the counselors said that they can identify problems sleeping, exaggerated startle response, impulse control, and anger control. It's also estimated that 10% of all women have PTSD, as opposed to 4% of sufferers of PTSD. Most PTSD, women who have PTSD usually fall under my diagnosis, which is complex PTSD, just because of abuse, et cetera, that happens. Those are basically in terms of the, and I do not have as much information on comorbid PTSD as I should. So using that and getting back to this gentleman who was at the wall, he was having a flashback and I just sat with him. Didn't ask. I just said, hey, you don't look like you're doing so good. Are you okay? Which is not really a question. I should have asked, how can I help you? And because if somebody says, are you okay? Your first response is, yes, I'm fine, when you're not. I just sat with him didn't ask any questions. We just sat there and I started talking about the trees and the forest and the grass and the sunshine, and to bring him back into that present moment, which is called grounding. And eventually I said, maybe you should take a break from fighting. But it was, and he said, it's the sound. I can't handle the sound. I can't handle the sound. And so we sat there until he could move up a little bit and leave the field. And so I did not ask him what his flashback was. It wasn't my business. My business was to be there and to help him in that. At the same time with that, one of the best ways actually to help with PTSD is actually role playing. And this is where the SCA can really help out and reach out to individuals. So that means that with all of those diagnoses, we should estimate that a good 10 to 15% of our population in SCA suffer from PTSD in some form. However, that number is going to be higher because of the pandemic. In talking with a Peace Corps volunteer who centered on natural disasters, he said basically worldwide, everybody is in a PTSD moment because no one has not been affected by the pandemic. And that we are going to see repercussions of that for the next 50 years or so. It's a long time. And this is where communities can help out. Does anybody right now have any questions? Because I would prefer to open it up instead of me just talking for an hour. Does anybody know anyone who has PTSD? Okay. Is anybody willing to share some or one of the struggles that they, as an ally, an advocate, or a support, have had during SCA events? Yes. Yeah, jump on in. Thanks, Ellis.
Okay, my partner has really, really bad PTSD, both from childhood, from his military service, kind of a lifelong situation. He got a lot of help from the VA. He was doing much better. We recently had a situation where he experienced a violent attack, and it has re-triggered everything and intensified it. So now I am trying to cope with living with somebody who is hypervigilant. This is not fun.
No, it isn't.
But he knows. He knows what he has to do. He knows the work he has to go through to get it back under control. And I will say that the VA is an amazing resource for any veterans who have any form of PTSD. It doesn't have to be militarily related. Once you have the diagnosis, you can get the help you need. And he does get the help he needs. It's just difficult to live with. And I pity anybody who's in this situation. The other thing I want to mention, and it's small, but I want to get it out of the way, is that if you know someone with PTSD who is triggered by loud noises and they are going to Penzic, where firing a cannon is a regular thing, there is a service you can sign up for that will notify you before the cannon goes off. And they give instructions on how to do it at Penzic. So if you know anybody who's triggered by loud noises, tell them to go sign up for that service.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody have any suggestions on our partners dealing with PTSD who are there supporting us for PTSD? Because I know my husband is a great support, but there are times he misses the boat on that. And it's not from malice or a lack of wanting to be encouraging. It's just that I'm allowed to deal with even without the diagnoses, but with the diagnoses, you know, it's a lot. It dominates everything during the healing process. So does anybody have any suggestions for Ellis in terms of, yeah, just jump on in.
I think that being aware of the fact that your partner's hypervigilant, him being aware of it is a great thing. And it's helped me, what's helped me as somebody with PTSD is when my partner reminds me of the things that help me, you know, meditation, doing something called the Safe and Sound Protocol, which I am happy to talk about later if you all want to know about that. And gently reminding me or asking me if I've done those things, you know, what's in my toolbox. My toolbox for taking care of myself includes these things, and having my partner know that this is my toolbox and not like pushing me or like nagging me to do them. But I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what helps me.
Anyone else? I know it's helpful for me a lot of times is space. I need that space. I need a space to be angry. I need a space to be sad. It is okay. I think in our society, we're told it's not okay to be angry. It's not okay to be sad. It's not okay to cry. And it is okay to cry. These are human emotions. We are human beings. And so that is important, is that space and recognizing it and asking for it. Yeah, did you have a question? Yes, Magnus?
Yes, I wanted to ask about, while I'm here, about when you're dealing with, I'm a heavy fighter, and we have some combat veterans that have PTSD at war and stuff, and I know a couple of them are completely untreated. They've been diagnosed, but they're not treated in any way. How do you best deal with something like that? Those people, I should say.
Yeah, does anybody have any suggestions?
Yeah. When they're triggered or in a, you know, I don't want to say altered state, but when they're in that, they're somewhere else, don't approach them from the back, don't touch them. I mean, in my household, we can't say boo. Literally, you don't walk up behind people and scare them.
Right.
But remind them of where they are in the present moment. You know, my boyfriend at any moment could wake up in Iraq. I'm like, no, honey, you're in Buffalo. You are in Buffalo. You know, and that they're safe. And the only other thing is kind of try to convince them to get off to the side to get their wits about them. Everyone needs to have their own coping skills, and it may or may not come from a doctor.
Has anybody found any coping skills that seems to work for them really well? I'll jump in on that one. So I started painting. It's not like I am not an artist, so this is not a artistry thing. But it has given me a way to sometimes I don't have the words for my emotions at all, but my canvas can. And so that has helped me. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question regarding working with someone who is experiencing a trigger on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And you said the individual you were dealing with was at the wall.
Yes.
If you have somebody who is like in the middle of a charge or a shield wall or something like that, what is the safest, best course to help this individual to either, I mean, obviously call hold, but is there a way to then extract them safely? Do you have to pause? I mean, I'm sure it's all individualized, but.
So one of the psychologists that I spoke with suggested that if you know that you are surviving PTSD, or if you suspect that your friend is surviving PTSD, that you establish a buddy system. And so that whenever you're fighting, you have that buddy. And those are actually fairly simple. My husband, he fights with Baron Hans all the time. The two of them go off and they lock swords together. But if one of them, if one of them had an episode, then the other would be there to assist. Or to say, let's get off the field. And that was the biggest suggestion from both the social worker and the psychologist, was to establish a buddy system. That way no one gets hurt. Because at some point, if what happens is that trigger, it puts that person right back in that moment. And on a battlefield, you can't get away from it really at all. And so by just, instead of saying, are you okay? We say, hey, you don't look too good in terms of fighting. Let's just step off the field. No, I'm good. Well, you know what? I am like I'm hot. I have got to step down for a little bit. So can you escort me off the field? And that allows that person dignity as they move off the field. Did that answer your question? Okay, Ellis?
As a marshal, it is hard to tell whether somebody who's curled up by a wall is in protective mode or is having a PTSD episode. If they are not in obvious distress, it is better to let the fighting, you can't always get to them. You have to wait until the fighting has cleared the area.
Right.
If they are still curled up at that point, they are probably in distress and need to be encouraged to take a break. But I would not call hold unless there were obvious external signs of physical or emotional fraughtness.
So how would it be better for a war field marshal to be approached to call hold? How would you bring that in?
I don't understand what you're asking.
So you mentioned that the marshals being aware.
Mhm.
Okay, is there a good way to then inform marshals? Or is it just to educate
If the
marshals?
marshal is in the middle of the battlefield, they cannot be approached from the outside
Gotcha.
easily.
All right.
You've got to consider that safety aspect.
Right.
So we're
And
looking,
that's why I say the marshal can sometimes not approach the person to find out if they want a hold call then, unless they are externally signaling that they do. And in that case, it is safer to wait until the fighting has moved on and talk to them then.
Okay.
or if there's an obvious injury.
Right. Or if they're, saying, get this guy off me, or something like that, you can tell when somebody is in obvious distress. It's the not obvious distress that you have to be a little more careful about, because it looks like there's a lot of fighting around me. I'm rolling up into a ball for a while, but when the fighting moves on, I'm going to stand up and go fight.
Right. It's true. Richard, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I was going to comment on that. It's not just the marshal's responsibility. Every heavy fighter out there, especially on a warfield, you need to be aware of the people to the left, to the right, in front and back, your comrades, your opponents, and watch for those signs. I mean, early in my SCA career, when I did fight heavy and I did war fighting, I got blasted by somebody who had an episode. Wasn't their fault. It happened.
Right.
But I noticed it, and I was the first person to scream hold, because it needed to be done. Well, a lot of times we put responsibility on our marshalate that is beyond just the marshalate. It's everybody's responsibility. Even if you're spectating, you may see something that a marshal doesn't see or another fighter doesn't see. That's why even in our list tournaments, the audience, the gallery can yell hold if they need to.
That's very true.
We all need to remember that we kind of all have to look out for each other, whether it be a physical injury or somebody going through a stressful situation or having an episode. So,
I agree with that. And again, I think that kind of goes back to the buddy system of having a person. I'm not saying that that's the end all be all, but on a battlefield where there's all hell is kind of breaking loose, that might be the safest episode. Ellis, did you have a question or comment? Your hand was up.
Yeah. The biggest problem with relying on a buddy system is that if your buddy gets killed and you no longer have a safety valve. Having all the fighters relying on each other is a much safer situation.
and I had a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
It's not just on the field of battle. I have friends in the SCA and outside the SCA that suffer from PTSD. It's also being aware of when you have to step up, and in essence, you can't go a hold, but you have to help them be able to extricate themselves from the situation or get the space they need.
That is very true. And I, as not a fighter, I've dealt with mainly with PTSD and others and myself off of the field of battle, and having to recognize that things affect me and or affect the people that I know. And that's really hard because it is, so I'm going to be talking about rejection here and anxiety. So if anybody has any issues, so feel free to block. I've got my little tab up. And mental illness is that we lost, then I say at the SCA, we lost several people that I know of because they have had mental illnesses, and felt unsafe because people told them that they were too much. They were emotionally manipulative. They were too much to handle. They couldn't deal with their issues, etc. And that really damaged those individuals. And I think that if, in terms of their PTSD not coming back, if we had just been a little bit more open as a society in the fact that we can't see that. PTSD is an invisible diagnosis. However, if I was in a wheelchair, and I'm not saying that but that's a physical representation of a disability, then there are allowances, but we tend to not make allowances for mental disabilities. And for some people, PTSD is comorbid, especially. It's a hard thing. And so how then if we have a fighter coming off the battlefield, or we have an individual who's not on the battlefield, then one of the suggestions was, and we mentioned that actually in the DEI roundtable, was to create a safe space for individuals, a safe space to go in. However, some people who have flashbacks don't even know they're in a flashback. They're busy, their mind is back being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And so there are some ways that we can help them, but there has to be trust in that. And if you have an unknown, this one fighter, for example, he didn't know me. He didn't really trust me. I just happened to be the person available. Does anybody have any suggestions then for reaching out to fighters and to other people to be an ally and support system, a support personnel for someone who has PTSD? Yeah, Brigitte?
One thing, excuse me, one thing we've taken to doing in our local barony for events, it's not per se for PTSD, but we have a specific quiet room.
Oh.
You can go there, you can decompress. We got squishy pillows, we have soft things, and you don't talk, you're not on your phone playing games, making noise. You go there to decompress.
That's a great idea.
For PTSD, it's more a case-by-case basis. You learn the members of your barony, of which, I have PTSD, my partner has PTSD, my partner did 3 tours in Iraq, 1 tour in Desert Storm. And so PTSD is very individualized. Something that will set him off won't set another off. I'll give you an example, hopefully a benign example. We were having our street paved. And he's like, I don't know why I'm jumpy. Oh, he had a moderate PTSD attack, and we figured out what it was. It was the street being paved, because when you arrive at Baghdad, it's like 120 degrees and the runway's asphalt. It took us, a good day or 2 to figure that out. But, once he knows, it's like, okay, this is what did this. I can deal with this now.
Nessa, you had a comment or contribution?
Yeah, I was thinking about, to Bridget's point about the quiet room, and or a safe space tent like I started last year in the West Kingdom. I'm wondering if we need to have, if it's outside or even if it's inside, depending on the event, like earplugs and maybe blindfolds available, something that people can, cut off one of their, whatever sense is triggering them. Like, I'm wondering if that would be useful to have those things on hand for people. What do you guys think?
Anyone?
Not with the cross-contamination of COVID right now, but in the future, maybe.
Right, of course. Yeah, sorry. I'm thinking about that. Yeah, I'm thinking about when we're not in a pandemic. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no. So I don't know that that's necessarily necessary or ideal, because each of us is going to have our own preferred methods of blocking things out. And I think each person is going to know what works for them. And ostensibly, hopefully, people are smart enough to bring their supplies with them. Just like we say with first aid supplies, you bring your own with you. Personally, my trigger is not something that I need to be blocked out for. Yeah. Mine is being trapped and unable to escape. So, and that's why I made the note about being marshals being triggered too.
Right.
You would think me as a marshal, I would know better than to get in a spot where I can't get out, but sometimes it happens. Luckily, I've been able to control that. I just, what looks like me just escaping the corners, me panicking and then getting the heck out of there. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So I put that trigger in the thing in terms of trap. Mine is safety and anxiety. So my social anxiety is really, really high. And I have to ground myself and to feel safe. And war is not a place that I have felt safe at all the time. I've actually felt very unsafe. My mechanism for handling that is I get to wherever the site is going to be a couple of days and I arrive when they're set up. And that way I see it building up slowly. And I feel a lot safer because I'm seeing it grow and I know I have a very good support system. So I'm actually quite fortunate. But my social anxiety always kicks in constantly. It's from, my CPTSD, and it just brings me into the future and I have to ground myself back. Does anybody else suffer from social anxiety, and how have you managed it? Are you willing to talk about how you've managed it? Your mic is off.
Who are you asking?
Anybody, anyone who would like to comment on it. Yeah,
I can comment. I have social anxiety that's developed over the past 5 or 6 years, and it really started happening when my wife and I were landed baronesses. So had a full-on kind of panic attack the morning of our stepping down, and and realized I had to ask people to leave the room. And I was like, I need space. Can you all just step out? And to my barony's credit, they're like, absolutely, and didn't make a big deal out of it. I think it's a matter of, and it's a very personal thing, is knowing, having a general idea of what your triggers might be, and then having an exit strategy or a plan of attack on how to get out of it. Either get yourself out of the situation or get yourself out of that thing. I saw Lissa had posted about the 5 senses, or someone had posted and Lissa commented, find what works for you. As to what to do if you see someone having an issue, it's part of it is just being aware of being aware of people and looking at reactions. We have some combat vets in our barony, and there was one of the larger events, Battlemore. There was some pirates setting off cannons in the middle of the afternoon, and I just saw this one vet just kind of crumple in her seat, and so I was like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? No, I don't want to go for a walk. I said, well, I need to go into town to get some ice. Do you want to go with me? And I didn't really need ice, but it was a nice time to go, and right. Just giving them an opportunity. It's like, hey, could I have your help going the hell away from this situation, and let's think and talk about something else? And she's like, yeah. And we just kind of got out of there. So you give someone, if you're of a mind, you give someone a way to, with dignity, deal with it, or give them the space to get out of a situation. If you see someone leaving the fire suddenly, and if you feel like, hey, that something caused them to something upset them, rather than calling at them, hey, come back, hey, just let them go. Another way is to know who their friends are. And if you're not the person, because there are some people that I'm not the person to go calm them down, but who might help them, go find that person and say, hey, this person seems to be having an issue. Could you just check on them? And find someone from their support system and throw them that way. Part of it is just kind of just social awareness. You don't have to know someone's problem, but there's a lot of responses, those very visceral responses that are universal. And then try and figure out just a gentle, quiet way to put things in their path that would help, or people in their path that would help, or gently offer help. And if they don't want help, that's fine, but still kind of keep an eye and see if they're managing to get out of their heads on their own, or if things start getting worse and you need to find someone to help them.
Good point. I listed a grounding method in the chat area to help out with everyone. These are things that my shrink, yes, I call her my shrink. My shrink has taught me, and also their grounding methods. So naming 5 things you see, 4 things you touch, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. And so Audrey, in terms of thank you for posting that's allyship, very, very definitely it is. Sometimes people, well, all people aren't always able to speak for themselves. So being able to speak for somebody, however, I would recommend asking, hey, you seem under distress. I'd like to go get somebody to help you. Not, can I go get you someone to help you, but I'd like to go get somebody to help you. I will be here while that person is here. And then instead of leaving them, physically taking them with you, so that by the time you get there, hopefully they're alone. They feel less alone, etc. I think that being able to say I need space is a great gift. And I think that being able to say as an ally, hey, I think this person needs space, is also a great gift. And the other thing, one of the elements that the psychologist had mentioned to me, and my shrink has said, is that because we are in the moment when we have our triggers, and we don't always know what that moment is. I have found personally that I had a friend once, and I was having a trigger, and I couldn't identify my emotions because I can't always identify my emotions. I don't have the vocabulary for it. I wasn't taught to have the vocabulary for it. So those are things that I'm learning. So instead, she said, hey, just give me 1-word phrases. And I was like, pine trees, red, snow, ice, and fire. And she said, wow, those are all survival things. So let's go on over here and give you some things for survival. And that really helped. Has anybody else helped anyone to step down from an anxiety incident? Any suggestions on how you did that? If you're willing to share.
Yeah, I work with kids a lot. And a lot of kids are kind of in and out of that sort of dreamland subconscious space, which is often what happens when we have PTSD episodes.
Right.
So sometimes, you can't even come to words, you're not able to physically speak. So being able to do stuff like, can you give me a thumbs up? Or if you need space, can you tap my hand once? Being able to do that stuff and not expect that someone is able to verbally communicate. I think that's important too, being able to find different ways to verbally communicate, to non-verbally communicate.
Right. Definitely. Anyone else? Somebody else had their hand up in terms of helping to, yeah, Brigitte?
The best thing, I mean, I have a very complex situation. I've got, a partner with complex PTSD and seizures. So the best thing to do is slow down. Don't fire questions, one question at a time. I find when my partner is in the midst of something, because I know him well, I can use yes or no questions because he'll start stuttering. It's like, I can understand y and n, and you've got to wait for it.
Right.
So most of the time, just space and learn as you learn people's physical symptoms, then it gets a lot easier. But it's like he has a complex partial seizure disorder, or it's partial paralysis seizure disorder. They keep flipping the diagnosis. So the best thing I told the doctors is he can hear you. He can't respond, but he will tell you what you said, even though he's unconscious, which they don't believe me and they find out later. And laughing is our coping strategy. So if I'm laughing about these things, don't think I'm being disrespectful. It's our way of coping.
Right. So I think everyone has their way of coping. When and I think validation, and it sounds like you're also looking at validation, validating, oh, I'm really anxious. We're at war. It's an anxious situation. And that validation that those feelings are okay can be very helpful. You mentioned, Brigitte, on a humor, when my husband came back from the sandbox, every time we were in a car, he kept doing this. I was like, what are you doing? And he said, I'm reaching for my gun. And I said, oh, there's no gun there. He's like, I know. And so he kept, but it went on for a couple of days. So I went out and I got him a squirt gun. So I put it on the dash. And I said, here you go. Because in Iraq, you have to always have your gun on. And he was so used to it that not having it caused him anxiety. Now, he does not suffer from PTSD, but that anxious movement of constantly trying to reach for something, I gave him something to reach for. It was a squirt gun, but I filled it with like soda and stuff like that. So, he could drink out of it if he wanted to.
My boyfriend carried his pistol on his leg, so he would always reach for his thigh.
Yeah, definitely. So the idea of safe words has come up in the chat. That was one of the things that I talked to psychologists about. And I am a big proponent on safe words. I think it's a great thing. Nissa, would you mind, since you have mentioned it, would you mind I'm sorry, I also have dyslexia. So sometimes my words I don't have it. So feel to throw those in.
Yeah.
If you elaborate.
Yeah. So my first understanding of what safe words came from the kink community, but it's not just something you have to use in that situation. So the most basic one is, basically stoplights. There's green, there's yellow, there's red. And, Kemper, you were saying earlier, fire and forest and all those things, and your friend knew, or I think your friend knew that what those words meant. If your friends or your campmates, the people you are with at the SCA event, know in advance that I use these are my safe words. If I say red, it means I need to go to my tent and be alone,
Right.
Or if I say yellow, it's like, I think I might be having a panic attack. You can establish with your friends and your people who are safe to you, saying, this is what this means for me. Also, I found useful in, aside from safe words during the pandemic, because a lot of my PTSD has come up while we've been, staying indoors and being, not knowing when this is going to be over is also a trigger. I found these things that I've seen online, mostly on social media, which are like grids with, emojis that say under them, like there's a moon and that means you're okay, or a tree means you need help, or, you know, and like visual. Sometimes when I go nonverbal, to have, instead of like, if I can't do the safe words, point at a picture and say, I am a cherry and I think I need help right now, or I am a teddy bear and please get me away from the situation. You know, like something you can point to, though, that can work in place of saying the safe word.
I think that's a great idea. Because it is sometimes hard to state I feel. I jumped on my manager's butt the other day for something that she did that made me feel unsafe, and I didn't start it with I feel. I just sort of launched, and then I stopped and I was like, sorry, I forgot to use I feel. But my management team knows I'm going through trauma therapy. Has anybody here used safe words during a war or a SCA event? All right, then. So in terms of also with
Ghislaine has her hand up.
oh yeah, please.
I don't quite know if it's along the same, I actually have two things. I don't know if it's along the same lines as a safe word, but I know groups or individuals in my non-household. We kind of like every so often we'll check in with each other in the sense of in one counter we see a individual and they're kind of backed into a corner by someone. And if we catch their eye, we do the whole Star Trek tap the communicator.
Right.
And they can go or either way, but it's sort of like, yeah, that whole little, are you okay, communicator, or whatever like that, little signal. If I may ask a different question.
Sure.
We have talked about the fight or flight. I know someone who has had the panic attacks or anxiety attacks or PTSD attacks that have hit so hard they have bolted.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think, I still don't know, other than running after them, which probably doesn't help because I probably look like a short, squatty, corgi-esque saber-toothed tiger. So what would be a more prudent way of dealing with that?
Does anybody have any input on that at all? Matilda?
I guess it depends on, you know, is this a child who's bolting and running towards a street? Is this someone who is just bolting, they've got their keys in their pouch and they're gonna just leave the event? And yeah, I don't have any good advice, except it's important to know, you know, maybe a calmer conversation with this person later of, okay, when this happens to you, what kind of help can I provide? And if they say, just let me leave, it's like, then you could share, I'm concerned of your safety if you're super upset, then getting into a car. But okay, and you know, talk to them when if you have that kind of relationship, talk to them and ask them in a calmer time, what can I do to help you in those moments? And maybe that helps.
Because the descriptions I've seen, this is an older adult, and when they bolt, it's not anywhere other than away from the immediate area. So they could be running for the hills, running for the river, running for the parking lot, running anywhere that is not there. So it's just something like that. Okay.
There are, you know, setting up like a sanctuary or a safe place and knowing that so somebody has a place to run to. I was in a situation in which I had an episode literally in the middle of an SCA event. And it was not pretty. when you start talking to your pal with, I took my crown off, that's not good. And I had somebody else step in and say, no, I get it. They ran after me. I was not happy about that, but they ran after me, took my keys, said, no, you are dangerous. They set me up with a support person, put me someplace safe, and then contacted people I trusted, who then came in to work with me. It's not really great when you lose it at your principality level, but the one thing that did come out of it is that I was able to then, I was not able to defend myself, which filled me with anxiety and frustration and fear and all sorts of things. But I had other people who acted as allies. I had a place to run to, and that might help. I'm not saying it's the absolute answer to everything, but those of us who are fleers, if we have a place, because when you're hyper vigilant, you're walking into an event and you are already scouting exactly where the safety issues are, how many exits there are, what's the best way to leave. You've parked your car in a place so it can make a dead getaway if need to. You've got your passport in case you need to leave the country. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And so having somebody, Australia had a sanctuary pavilion a couple rows down, and I ended up spending a lot of time there. It was a place to run to, and I was able to do it. And so I think that those safety areas, if they're known, can provide a place to run to. And that might be really important. Thomas, you have your hand up?
Sorry, I couldn't get it unmuted.
That's all right.
And of course, because there's 2 of us here. One of the things that works for me when I take off works and doesn't work is if there's anything that sets me off, where either I'm going to run or I go down, I have very similar, the reaction after that is always the same, which is there can't be a group of people. So if 3 people take off chasing me, now it's a hunt, and now I'm feeling 10 times worse. And so there are people who I know and trust, and I consider part of my family, who could go after me. But the problem is that people think that, other friends think that they're helping and they take off. Or, like I said, if I just go down, because I'm also, one of my reactions is also to just kind of turtle up in the exact spot I'm in.
Right.
And everybody kind of comes around and is like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I'm just like, go away, go away, go away. And everybody's like, no, wait, let me help you. And it's like, just stop, just go away. The best thing in the world that you can do at that point for me and people that I know who have those similar issues is literally turn your back and guard me. Step away from me, give me space, open everything up, and just make sure nobody else comes at me and give me a chance to calm down. Because no matter how many times you ask me, are you okay? No matter how many times, somebody says it, I'm not going to calm down until I can get everything internally under control. And like for me, my safe space when I run is I go to the car, but I'm also really careful of, I never have the keys to the car, ever.
Right.
My husband always has them. And the whole point is just to go find someplace where I know I can be alone. And people may follow me to the parking lot, but if they know that I don't have the keys, they don't have to worry. Then they just have to kind of make sure that I just sit there for a few minutes until they can either go get my husband or go or feel that they can approach when I run. Of course, the worry is if I do that at a war, because then you may never find me. But on the other hand, I also have a huge survivor instinct, which means that as soon as I realize that I'm running, say, I think you used the phrase like running towards a river or running towards a parking lot. Running towards the parking lot is fine as long as I see the car, and I'm pretty vigilant, even in full-on panic mode. I've been known to swerve to miss cars and that are driving. You know, I suddenly will turn and not run into a river or something along those lines. So I'm pretty safe to let run, and I'm short and fat and can only run for a very short period of time anyway. So that also is kind of to my advantage. But the people I know who have similar issues that I have been able to help, it's always with just like staying back far enough to like make sure that they are safe, but just give them time to wear themselves out and basically guard their back, and make sure that they have the space to calm down themselves. Because in my experience with people I have been able to help and myself is that no amount of outside is going to help you. You have to get through your thing yourself, you know, and bring yourself out of it. So everybody's a little bit different, of course, as we all know. So I just wanted to kind of give like a different perspective of, as opposed to, you know, people who are like, oh yeah, you have to go. And like the worst thing in the world that you could do is grab me and drag me, you know, across the fighting field to go find my husband or go find one of these people who I have who I have in my head as somebody to help me, because all that is taking away my control.
That's a good point.
And so that is not always the best option for some people. And if they fight you on it, you got to let them go. So, because that is the absolute worst thing that you could do for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Audrey, you had your hand.
Yeah, I like, I'm not sure because there's two names on your thing, if that was Thomas or Christine who was talking, but I kind of like.
Sorry, that was Christian. I should really.
Oh, Christian. Thank you. Yeah, I kind of just want to second what you were just saying. Like my trauma responses are pretty much exclusively freeze responses. I don't get punchy and I don't want to run. I just kind of like stop. And any time that that's happened to me, what has been helpful has been familiar faces. Like I have like 2 or 3 people that like in the SCA, if that were to happen to me, that they can help me, and anybody else is just like overkill. Like it will make me feel worse. It will make me feel like it puts me back into the trauma rather than actually being helpful. So I think like in terms of being an ally, like how do we support our friends and other SCA people who are experiencing that? It's a willingness to not like be a hero, I guess, if that makes sense. Like so many times like that I've had a trauma response, I've had people that like mean really well, that like want to help me, and I'm like, please go away, like you are making me feel worse. So I think like, yeah, just a willingness to like, and I say this as someone who has trauma, like treat it like a scared dog, like not to infantilize it or like make it be like you're being an animal, but like if a scared dog is like gonna bite you, you're not gonna like try to keep petting it, like try to coax it into eating something, you know, like you're gonna give it some space. So yeah.
So maybe asking, what do you need, is a good way to.
Yeah, and also like knowing that you might not get an answer to that. Like I think being able to find, like, I can't remember who said it earlier, but being able to find like whoever the people are for that person at an SCA event, like it might be a stranger, but you might know like, okay, this person's from Wolfscairn or this person's from, you know, wherever, and being able to find people that might know that person better, instead of like assuming that you're always going to be able to help.
Right. Does anybody have anything else to add to that?
I was just going to point out one of the skills I've learned raising 3 children is how to chase and follow somebody without chasing or following them. In other words, know that they're not going to they're not in immediate danger, but you know where they went, kind of where they're going. And instead of tracking them down, go find somebody who you know they camp with, who they may be partnered with or good friends with, and say, just an FYI, I saw so-and-so headed that way.
Right.
Because you don't know what happened. Don't want to put any preconceived notions in, but that alerts somebody close to them that would hopefully be in their circle that, hey, you might want to check on your friend or your partner or your campmate.
It's a good point. Nessa, you had a,
Yeah. For me, it's not always, to piggyback on what somebody else was saying, I think, Audrey, that, it's not necessarily the people who I feel safest with, but people who, there can be people I don't even know very well who are very grounding, who can be very grounding. And much like the example you started with, Kemper, about you helping that man on the edge of the battlefield, like, you didn't know him, he didn't know you, he didn't necessarily trust you, but you made yourself available to not try to make things better in the moment, but just sit with that person in the moment. And there are people, I don't necessarily have to call people out here, but I would say that, some people at events will just come up to me and say, hey, how you doing? Do you need anything? If I look like I'm being anxious or, stressed about something, and I'm not, and if I can't ask for it, until somebody says, hey, you need anything? And I'm like, oh, it never occurred to me, like, to ask. Sometimes that is welcome, but I can't really tell you what the difference is when it's okay and when it's not okay. I also I'm going to put in the chat a link to something that's helped me a lot over the past couple of years, that I started before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, is something called the Safe and Sound Protocol, which is, once you've done it, it's really easy to just listen to it again in a shorter version if you need like a timeout, if you can find a safe space to go to and have a quiet space to listen to it. It involves music and the vagus nerve, which helps to regulate your nervous system in a good way. And I'm not very fluent in talking about it, but I will just say that much, and I'll let the link speak for itself.
thank you. And that ability to ask or remove someone, I'm gonna pick on her even though she's not here, but I think Duchess, Mistress Shefa, who is now in the East Coast, actually had a huge role to play in me staying in the SCA, because she saw my panic. She saw that I was in trouble, and instead of saying, what can I do to help, or etc., she literally came in and said, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's do this. And she didn't ask questions. She was not on my safe team, and she still isn't, but she was somebody who stepped in to say, hey, this is what I did. I don't think she'd mind me using her name, to be honest, but so, and if she does, then I'll hear about it later. But I think that the link there, the Safe and Sound Protocol, is up. So, and one of the interesting things that my work keeps telling me is I have value, which I finally had to stop them from doing and saying, you're stressing me out, because now I don't believe you because you said it too much, is that feeling of safety. You're safe, you're safe. And my partner did that for a while. He kept going, you're safe, you're safe. I said, well, now I don't feel safe at all because you keep reminding me. And now I feel like I'm in a horror movie where you're, etc. But one of the things that he has done to help when I am in trauma is ask me, do you have a means of escape? Can you get away? Do you have an exit? And that's just sometimes in a heated discussion. And I have found myself using that when I'm at an SCA event, because I'm hyper vigilant. It's going to be that way. Like I'm already figuring out who I need to avoid, where I can run to, where I can hide and no one can find me, and where I can have a nice little mental breakdown. And so that ability to recognize my surroundings, but in a healthy way, where can I go and get out of, can be very helpful. Has anybody here created a safety plan for themselves or helped create a safety plan for others whom they are part of that support team regarding PTSD? Audrey, do you mind sharing?
No, I think what's helped is talking about it first of all, but like I have friends that I know that like I can talk to and say, hey, if you find me in your camp and I'm just like squatting in your camp, that's cool, right? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. So
Okay.
like I think part of it is it's hard to talk about because it can be really embarrassing, even though it's like more common than I think we realize. But like I've straight up had like severe panic attacks in the middle of an event, and then just like I'll leave, like I'll just be gone, and then like someone will show up at their camp and I'm just like sitting in their chairs and they're like, hi Audrey. I'm like, hi, you doing okay? I'm doing better now. Like being able to speak up for yourself and advocate, I think is difficult, but there are people who care about you. So yeah, I don't know if that's a plan so much as just a conversation that has to happen with some people that you know.
Anyone else? Thomas, you had your hand up.
I was just gonna say that it's Christian again. I really
Sorry, Christian.
No, it's cool. I know that you're calling Thomas. That's me. Because we really are both here. He just doesn't speak as much. I did, and actually it was the first time that I went to a war with the intention of fighting in a melee in rapier, because I had some bad experiences while fighting heavies. And I had a person who I knew was going to be Kyrgyz on the field who also fought rapier. And I said, if I go down, I need you to be the one to get to me. Because I don't know that I can't promise that I won't react badly to people I don't know. And so I had talked to our rapier general. I talked to the people on my particular squad, and I had this person who was prepared to and fought with my group that day anyway. So that sure enough, when I went down, because I started to panic because the group was too big and I was in a space that had seemed safe to fight in, seconds before, and suddenly there was just too many people there, and I went down, and of course they called the hold, and he literally jumped people to get to me and back everybody off. And I had that every time I I went onto the fighting field, but I never thought to do it at a just a standard event. And now I'm like listening to this and hearing that I'm not the only person that suffers from this. I'm like, you know what? I should probably come up with some sort of plan for just a daily basis, because it's just one of those things of you don't really think about it until somebody else, for me, it's one of those things of like, it made sense to do something about it on the war field, but doing it just a standard event hadn't really clicked until literally just now.
Before you shut the microphone off, this is Thomas, and I was just going to comment regarding what Audrey had to say a couple of minutes ago. I know that our camp has been used as a bolt hole for various people over the years who have found themselves in stressful situations, and I never really thought about it in the terms that you had put it. But I think that making sure that that you've got a place you can go where the people are going to be friendly and where you feel safe is very comforting, and may induce you to not need that bolt hole necessarily. just knowing that you've got it. And so, yeah, if you can work out with other people, is it okay if I come and, and if you come back to camp and I'm sitting there, are you cool with that? And, just in case I need a place to go. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and there are some, I know on Tier 4, there is a list of safe places. Because I know like Ermine Company has listed themselves as a safe place, so that if you are in any way are in need, you can come there and no one will ask questions, but just help to keep you safe. Ellis, you had a comment or question?
There. One of the things that can be very important, especially if you are camping with the people you always camp with, or you are camping with people you don't know really well, is to have a safe place outside your own camp. Because if camp goes weird on you and you need a place that you can just go sit away from the craziness, I know that there are people to whom I have said, when you need a quiet place, go to my tent. Go in there. If Michael is in there, that's fine. If you want to talk to him, fine. If you don't, just sit there.
Right.
But sometimes your own space isn't safe. Don't assume that because you have your own tent, you have a safe space.
That's very true. Does anybody have any other suggestions or comments or questions on anything? Does anybody have questions? Oh, go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, I think, and this may be like super overgeneralizing, but when you offer your camp space as a safe space, and it's just kind of a general open to all kind of safe space, I think understand what that means. Like, don't just say this is a safe place and like not take the responsibility that entails, because for sure, there are so many camps that are safe places where I'm like, I will never go hang out with you guys if I'm feeling stressed out. Like, because the atmosphere isn't calm, or the atmosphere isn't supportive, or I feel like if I were to sit down at your table, you would make me talk, kind of thing. So just like as a general thing, like if like I personally don't super necessarily trust if someone says, hey, my camp's a safe space. Like if you're doing that, there's a responsibility to that. There's got to be actual like substance to that, not just something you say.
Good point. Yeah. Nissa?
To that point, I would say that, my camp at Penzic, which feels so long ago and so far away, that La Familia Gladiatoria, we have established in the past 5 years or so that our camp is a safe space for people who are queer and might need a place to, if they don't feel safe going to the restrooms and using the restroom that they feel comfortable in, if they need to change, they need to bathe, they can come to our camp and do so. And everybody in our camp understands that is the policy. Everybody in our camp is on board with that. We have a very large camp, but it is one of the things that attracts people to camping with us. And it's how we've gotten some people to camp with us, because they're like, if that camp has that policy, I want to be with that camp, yeah, you're absolutely right, Audrey. It does come with a huge responsibility, and we don't take that lightly.
Thomas, I'm going to jump you over for Magnus, or Thomas and Christian. Magnus, and then I'll get back to you, Thomas. Magnus, you had something?
Yes, I have seen a number of people that are triggered by a fear of crowds or a fear of smothering or spaces closing in around them. And many of these campsites at war are very crowded. very crowded, overbooked with tents, just a tent every square foot.
Right.
Would you have any ideas on how people could adapt to that?
So my idea and the way that I dealt with it, and I have dealt with the fact of crowds is actually, I do a lot of volunteering. Now, I like volunteering anyway, but it also kind of provides me an opportunity to function in a smaller situation. It's more of like a bubble. And I personally do a lot of late night fire walks or late night walks. And that has helped me in terms of just grounding. It helps everybody in general. And honestly, I really enjoy the service also. So it's kind of like a 5-for-1 type of thing. So in terms of, it helps me to get away from the crowds and gives me a set time in which, hey, these crowds are here. I've removed myself to my tent, but I need more solitude. And those late night walks honestly have really, not only do I get to meet people and help people, but I also get that solitude. And it helps to kind of ground me. That would be my suggestion but that's what works for me. Does anybody else have a suggestion on crowds? Yeah, Ellis?
You mentioned this happening at wars. Some of the emptiest spaces at wars, when they are not being used for their functions, are places like the battlefield, the archery field, the big public spaces. You can be awfully alone at Penzic on the battlefield. And that's something to keep in mind if you need to be isolate for a while. Nobody will think anything of you being there.
Sure.
Nobody will tell you to go away. And it's a moderately safe place to be.
Thomas, you had a comment? Or Christian?
We kind of went into a different direction. All I was going to say is that in answer to your initial question of, it's not just a case of like what other people can do to make things safe for you. You need to know, like, you need to be honest with yourself about what you need. So if you need to be in a space that has open, you take Ellis's suggestion and you go find yourself on the battle, you make a plan, go out and find a spot on the battlefield later in the evening to just give yourself a few minutes to get away from the crowds. If you know that you need a safe space where you can go and sit and be quiet, you find somebody who's willing to help you with doing that. You have to be honest with yourself. It can't be everybody else's responsibility to make sure that you are safe at an event. You also have to do it for yourself. And I always feel when I make that comment to anybody, I always feel like I'm getting really preachy, but the fact of the matter is that everybody wants to help you, or almost everybody wants to help you. And it's so easy to let them to just not have to think about it yourself because you've got so much other stuff to deal with PTSD. But the fact of the matter is that you also still have to like really pay attention to yourself and know your limits and where you're willing to stretch them and where you're not. So that was what I just wanted to say.
That's a great point. We have 7 minutes left. So Ellis, you wanted to make a comment and then we can take anybody else? Okay, so I'm gonna basically wrap this up then. I put some handouts out there. There's a lot of really good suggestions in the chat. So please feel free to access those. I would say this much, and that PTSD, from just my own experience and in talking with others and being part of a group, PTSD survivors group, is a very misunderstood but yet overused term. So we'll mention like, oh, well, I have PTSD from my bear attack. Well, yes, but that's a different type than complex PTSD, for example. And that educating, I think, is a really good way to do it. The other thing is that ultimately, all of us want to belong. And that belonging is I feel is filled with anxiety when you have PTSD. For me personally, and it's not nobody else's, that's an issue that Kemper has to deal with, is that anxiety of I am never going to be good enough is going to be there because it's part of my PTSD. And we all want to belong, but that also means that all of us who survive PTSD, we are bringing that PTSD with us, whether we like it or not. And that means that we have to know that that's a part of us, and then feel comfort. And bumping off of Thomas's comment is to know thyself in that sense. Magnus, you had something you wanted to say?
Just thank you.
You're welcome. If anybody has any questions or would like to talk to me further about this, please know that I may not be able to help you. I'm not a shrink, but I am here. And it's like, I recently reached out to somebody and I said, hey, if you need somebody, I can be a person. And they were like, no, I got it. And I was like, yeah, but everybody just needs somebody to turn to and go, man, this sucks. Or I can't breathe, or I'm having difficulty. And sometimes people just need a person. And if each of us act as an ally to the best of our abilities, and that ranges from person to person and from diagnoses to diagnoses and from symptoms to symptoms. The ultimate thing is that with PTSD is that we want to tap into that parasymptomatic response that grounds us back down and down completely. So if anybody has any other further, doesn't have any further comments, I'm gonna go ahead, Magnus. Yep. I think that was a bye. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you. Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Magnus. Can't hear you.
I'm going to another Zoom event across the country. I
Oh,
just wanted to
okay.
let you know.
Safe travels.
I've got a known world event I'm going back to. So thank you so much for this.
You're very welcome. Thanks to all who participated. Have a really safe day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kemper.
Bye-bye.